You are one of the few people who defend the idea of having tax havens. Doesn't that lead to a sort of unfair competition? Is there no danger in having this race to the bottom between countries forced to lower their taxes? Maybe there's a future where they lower the taxes so much that they can't provide the public services anymore.
I've been fighting this issue for 2 decades. The simple way to think about this is that politicians from high tax countries want to create a tax cartel, sort of like the oil producing countries have OPEC. Well, the politicians from places like France and Germany and unfortunately under Obama, the United States, they all decided, hey, we don't like these tax havens because these tax havens make it hard for us to keep tax rates at high levels. If you look at the data, if you go back to say 1980, before globalization really took effect, the average top tax rate on individuals, on households in OECD countries was about 68%, and the average corporate tax rate was 48%. Well, thanks to tax competition, as globalization sort of took off, you had more and more people being able to utilize tax havens, more and more companies being able to use them for tax planning. And what happened is this put pressure on politicians, and the politicians all around the world, even in France, they started lowering corporate tax rates and personal tax rates. Now, why did they lower the tax rates? Were they reading my studies? Were they reading Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek? No. The only reason the politicians lowered tax rates is they realized if they kept tax rates too high, the money would escape and go to the tax havens. So I love tax havens as a discipline, as a check on the greed of politicians to try to grab more money. Now, here's the bad news. Thanks to Obama and politicians from France and Germany and the UK and Japan and other OECD countries, they have largely succeeded in destroying the human right of financial privacy around the world. And that means high tax countries now have much greater ability to track and tax flight capital. And what do we see? Well, all of a sudden, tax rates are going back up again. And I fear that because of the coronavirus, one consequence of the economic downturn and the lost tax revenue, because people and businesses that are out of work and not making money, they're not generating revenue for the politicians. The politicians are going to use that as an excuse to raise taxes even higher. And if people don't have ways to escape, that gives the politicians more leeway to push tax rates ever higher. And that's, in the long run, a big recipe for economic weakness and lower living standards for the people.
You mentioned OECD. They used to be quite the pro free market organization, and now they're one of the promoters of sort of tax harmonization. Why do you think this happened? What changed their mind? They often use the argument that there's a need to level the playing field. Is there any sense in this analysis, or what do you think happened there?
The OECD did start out as a pro market organization, and indeed, many of the economists who work at the OECD still produce very good research papers and studies talking about the benefits of low tax rates and smaller government. But the policy making parts of the OECD, those are controlled by member governments, and it's just part of this cartelization that they exhibit. Now, to be fair, the people at the OECD and also at the European Commission and other international bureaucracies that have this statist mindset, they do have this theory, and I think I have a visual to put on the screen. They have this theory called capital export neutrality, where they justify this level playing field argument because they say that, well, if people are engaging in tax planning, if they're making decisions solely on the basis of lowering their tax bills, that might not be the most productive way of ordering their economic behavior. And so these people say, oh, because people are making inefficient choices because of taxes, therefore, if we all harmonize taxes at high levels, if we destroy financial privacy so governments can track this money around the world, if we do things like a common consolidated corporate tax base so companies can all be taxed at a higher rate, these people actually argue, Well, that'll be good because you won't have inefficient forms of tax planning. And there's a tiny kernel of truth to that argument. But here's what they overlook. If you look at that equation that's hopefully on the screen right now, you also have to measure, well, what's the economic damage of things like higher tax rates, of more double taxation, of the bigger government that gets financed as more money is diverted from the private sector of the economy. So by any rational, logical, neutral bit of economic analysis, obviously tax competition is very good for economic growth around the world. And indeed, even OECD economists have agreed with that message. The problem is that the politicians who run the OECD and the bureaucrats who meet with the different committees at the OECD, they don't care about economics. They're just representing the self-interest of politicians who don't like it when there's competition that makes it hard for them to raise taxes and buy more votes with other people's money.